Horror, the genre with the sole intent of knocking your socks off. For many, this genre of movies is a favorite, and for good reason, holding countless classics and some fantastic storytelling. The genre itself has greatly impacted movie production, special effects, formulas, and expectations from within the audience. I myself have always had a distinct enjoyment for the possible terror within these narratives. I've seen hundreds of the scariest movies and still struggle to find a reaction. Truthfully, it would be inaccurate to say that even a quarter of these movies have frightened me over the years. I'd even go as far as to say that under 10 have. Within a quick Google search, you can find countless films that have scarred audiences, or some that are too disturbing. Critically acclaimed movies such as Hereditary are often regarded as some of the best horror media. I've seen Hereditary 4 times and not once has it gotten a reaction from me. So many of these films have an excellent premise and fail to live up to the possibilities. Others strive for discomfort and gore, occasionally riding the edge of fetish content. This ultimately leads me to my main questions. What made this short list of movies scary at all? What caused the other shortcomings, and why is good horror media so hard to find? Today we're going straight into the deep end of the horror genre in search of answers. I'm 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀, and this is The Search for Terror. To begin, I'd like to introduce what I believe to be the criteria of a truly scary movie. There are 3 main horror groups, and to truly terrify, usually at least 2 groups should be covered. These groups being fear of the unknown, relatability, and situational horror. Fear of the unknown is probably the most commonly used term in discussions of fear. As the name implies, it's the fear of not knowing or understanding what is within your situation. The category also involves subtlety within a situation. Rewatching a movie to notice the unknown creature in the background is one of the best ways to build suspense. This trope most frequently applies to stories centered around aliens and ghosts, but is not limited to any one thing. Relatability is crucial as well. Without being able to relate to the characters or their situations, the immersion is broken and the fear is lost. Even small pieces of dialogue can ground a character in reality. This category also involves stories based on some form of truth, so true stories, or found footage. True stories give an eerie realism that otherwise can be difficult to achieve. Relatability is most often lost due to counteractive character decisions which break the immersion. Lastly, situational horror. This is the most vague category as well as the most individualized. Situational horror can look different for everyone, the keystone being a situation that is fundamentally horrifying. This category includes tension within a situation as well. Without proper tension, the horror simply fails. A lot of the time, this category involves narratives with children or isolation. Situational horror relies fairly heavily on relatability. Additionally, fear of the unknown works well with situational horror. These 3 categories connect in multiple important ways. One can fail without another, and one can be lost due to another. Of course, this criteria isn't 100% accurate, but when revising the films that scared me, all of them hit at least 2 categories and rarely even all 3. Our first category, and possibly the easiest to get wrong. I'm sure you've seen a horror movie or two that explicitly hides the monster up until a cheesy CGI jump scare. The unknown should be established and built on, with evidence allowing the viewer to theorize. This story archetype can be seen within all of horror, one of the earliest notable examples being Psycho from the 1960s. The killer is not shown, but rather the terror inflicted. This builds tension and forces the mind to fill in all the gaps. Though Psycho isn't up to modern-day standards, it's a great example of unknown horror. Another important aspect of the unknown is being subtle. One of my favorite examples of subtlety within horror comes from a TV show, surprisingly a Netflix original, The Haunting of Hill House from 2018. This 10-episode series has countless ghosts hidden cleverly within the background. This significantly builds tension even though you can see the monster. You don't know the extent of their power, nor their intentions. The best part of these ghosts is the benefits they hold within the main plot. Rather than being used for cheap scares, they're used to flesh out the haunted manor, which ultimately builds immersion. It is a prime example of subtlety and how to do it properly. The Mist is another fantastic piece of horror media in which the monsters are shown, but the tension and unknown remain. The Mist shows the alien creatures from bugs to tentacles, but you never know the full extent of these monsters. As the movie progresses, the variety of creatures expands. I didn't personally feel fear, but it has the unknown elements down. If you haven't seen The Mist, it has one of my personal favorite horror movie endings. I won't spoil it here, but it's worth checking out. There's two more movies I want to talk about in regards to the unknown. To start, The Thing from 1982. This is by far John Carpenter's best work and a masterclass of practical effects, the unknown, and situational horror. The creature, or the Thing, is uncovered in Antarctica by a small research base of 10 men. The Thing has a unique ability to copy any living organism on a cellular scale, creating identical replicates without the memories to commemorate that form. Throughout the movie, each character has any right to be the monster, assimilating everyone one by one. The Thing's true form is never shown. There's a few moments where it's shown mid-transformation, but beyond that, it's an alien with unforeseen abilities. This is how to do the unknown, how to build not just a great horror movie, but a fantastic narrative centered around isolation and mistrust within this group. No one is safe, the stakes of the world could be at risk, and there's almost no way to know who is the Thing. It's plausible with the role set in reality to the point where it hits all three of our main categories. Follow that up with another shapeshifter movie, with It from 2018. This movie got all the praise during its release. It had scares, a good premise, and a coming-of-age story. I was younger during its release and did genuinely feel fear, but looking back on it, the shapeshifter Pennywise is the issue. He appears throughout taking the form of what you fear most. It's a fantastic hook and a good premise, but it's barely explored. There are multiple moments where his motivations aren't clear, but it's not the unknown, rather incoherent and occasionally comically idiotic moments. This movie thrives on cheap scares and CGI, relying on established fears rather than building horror within the story. It also doesn't hold enough situational horror or relatability to get a genuine scare from me. Out of the movies covered, only It and The Thing got any reaction from me during my first viewing. The unknown is evidently important, but it's easy to get wrong. A lot of newer horror movies are criticized for their showings of the monster, and to me it boils down to lazy writing. The unknown is crucial for scares and is unfortunately frequently glanced over. Something a lot of horror movies do try to cover is relatability is the groundwork of countless films not limited to any one genre. A lot of animated movies use relatability to create marketably flawed characters. Characters people see themselves in. Connecting with your audience is one of the fundamentals of good storytelling. A very common way horror movies ground their narratives and connect with the audience is the based on a true story trope. By loosely basing your story on a real tragedy, suddenly the campy events of a standard horror become real, something someone genuinely lived through. Of course, that's not how these true story films genuinely operate, but this effect can work. The Conjuring, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and Megan is Missing were all amplified by the true story attached. The Conjuring has some genuine terror, but it's a slow burn without much of a final punch. People are scared because they can see themselves in this situation and because it may have actually happened. I originally saw this movie at the ripe age of 9. Needless to say, I was terrified, but its take on relatability can only go so far. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is the same. One or two scary scenes that only work with the idea of a true story. But with a little research, you realize that almost the entire film is fiction, with some of the plot coming from the real exorcism of 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗁. The actual exorcism tapes are beyond horrifying, and that allows the Exorcism of Emily Rose to be elevated. But again, I feel as if the true story is not done justice here. Megan is Missing is the exact same thing. Loosely based on a true kidnapping, with the relatability being the only way the kidnapping is scary at all. It's the unnerve that this has and does happen. But beyond that, this movie has weird writing, slow bad acting, and filler until the last 30 minutes. 100% marketing a terrible situation. An alternative to true stories is taking true medical conditions and using that as a basework for your horror. Maybe it's a bit in poor taste, but countless movies use real medical conditions to build suspense. The Taking of Deborah Logan uses Alzheimer's to build a demon plot. It's perfect that I just made a video on Alzheimer's because it's the horror of the disease that is initially scary. The film has the potential to use unreliable memory to create an unreliable character, or it could show the perspective and disillusions one with Alzheimer's experiences. But instead of that, it dilutes into a standard documentary-style demon movie. The initial realism of the medical condition and the behaviors it causes are the only real pieces of horror within this movie. The best relatability will mix real-world issues like medical conditions and trauma with a relatable character. Get Out from 2017 does this, but it takes it to the next level. Not only is it a relatable character with explored trauma, but Get Out adds another level of racial misjustice, which makes for a fantastic experience. Get Out follows Chris as he and his girlfriend spend a weekend meeting her parents. Chris is nervous as he's her first black boyfriend. His friend cautions him of the possibility of traveling to the country to a rich white household. Of course, exactly what was warned happens. On the way to the house, an officer stops Chris and his girlfriend. Chris, who is in the passenger seat, is questioned by the officer and asks for an ID. He's ready to submit, directly showing that this isn't his first time in the situation. The heavy-rooted racial themes are what makes this movie all the more tense, knowing that if Chris called the police in search of help, his word very well may be undermined by a group of white people. Not to mention the use of hypnosis to visualize freezing, but also further the plot and explain the intentions of the family. The freezing is the exact trauma Chris holds with his mom's death. He didn't call for help, and she died. As Chris sinks into what is called the sunken place, he is a bystander to his life. He screams, but not a sound is made. He is frozen at that moment, but the world keeps going. Terror is furthered with every other black character confirmed to be in the sunken place. Some live in it for years as white minds control the body. The realism of the racial prejudice and the trauma that Chris holds as an individual is astonishing. This is relatability at its best. The ideas of realism and the connection with the audience is what makes Get Out so powerful. It has something to say and it does so gracefully. Get Out is the only movie in this category to get any reaction from me, and it's not even horror. The ideas of character relatability, true stories, and a grounded plot make up a majority of what could be good horror. Clearly, relatability is a crucial element and not one easy to perfect. With this in mind, relatability is most closely intertwined with situational horror is unique in the sense of how the fear is built. The situation needs a layer of relatability to put yourself in the given context, but also tension, sound, and of course a horrifying situation. In the case of Sinister from 2012, this movie is situationally scary, but also horrifying due to the soundtrack. Finding a box of old tapes only to uncover the mystery involved is far from a new trope, but it was the awful discomfort these tapes brought that got genuine fear out of me. As I mentioned earlier, situational horror often has either isolation or children within the context. Of course, The Thing has the isolation part down, but another acclaimed movie involving isolation and children is The Shining. Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, his wife and son are isolated as they watch over a hotel for the winter months. Jack slowly loses his mind as he is influenced by evil spirits within the hotel. This simple presence covers all three categories of good horror. It's unknown as the spirits aren't known. The movie is intentionally left to be very interpretive, which is the best way to create the unknown. It's relatable as you could see yourself in a situation like this, but also it's grounded enough to have another layer of relatability. It's situationally scary as there is no escape or defense in the case of the child. But because of the presence of all three, suddenly the movie is far scarier. It's situationally scary because of the presence of the unknown and the relatability of the characters. It's further unknown as the spirits may influence the relatable loss of sanity. One builds off another and another. This is how the best horror is made, and it's for that reason it's one of my favorite horror movies. Same thing with Get Out, where the relatability builds into the situational horror and thus the unknown. This formula is necessary in building true horror. Situational horror is what inspired this video. I decided to watch Parasite, which is in no way associated with the horror genre. There's one single minute-long scene that beats most of horror media. This little boy, Dae-sung, is celebrating his birthday a little early. He's alone downstairs late at night, enjoying his cake in his rich family home. He's alone, but he's not worried as this is a complete safe space for him. Then, from up the stairwell, a face appears. Static rises as Dae-sung screams before falling into a seizure. Within the movie, you already know who it is coming up the stairwell. It's not a ghoul or a ghost, but rather a human hiding amongst the house. It's situationally horrifying, not because of the unknown, but rather the interpretation of the child. It's relatable as in first grade you would likely react the same to this situation. It's horror at its best and it doesn't even utilize the unknown. Short, to the point, services the story and no jump scares. This, without a doubt, is my favorite example of situational horror and how to create a devastating scene. We have covered movies from all across the horror genre. Some classics, some with everything needed for masterful horror, and some that struggle to find their footing. Yet our terror total is only at 7 movies, 2 of which have an age bias. Throw in Finding Nemo, which I couldn't possibly watch unless I was 10 feet away from the TV, and our final total is 8. 8 movies out of possible hundreds that scared me at all. We've looked at what makes a movie scary, we've answered the initial shortcoming questions. All that is left to ask is, why is good horror media so hard to find? Horror movies today often feel played out as if they've lost some of the magic. There are plenty of up-and-coming passionate people who've begun working on the next generation of scares, but at this moment, we're yet to have enough. This genre has more movies than I can count, and only 3 horror movies frighten me at all. Get Out and Parasite both respectively understand horror and create scenes that beat an entire genre. Modern adaptations of classics and new horror entries use this formula of unease or in-your-face action that makes you get pissed off for being startled. I love this genre, I really do, and I wish I had come to a better conclusion. I genuinely wish more passion was put into these projects. The horror community is lush and filled with creativity. So many fans have used their understanding of horror to create phenomenal video games, shorts, and horror experiences. The film industry is appealing to a wide audience more than anything else, going for tropes that historically have scared audiences. Audiences today have higher expectations and don't want cheap scares. We want horror that is not limited and encapsulates good storytelling. I really do hope that in the future, horror can be taken to the next level. Thank you for joining me today on my search. I had a lot of fun working on this video. If you haven't already, I highly recommend the aforementioned video covering dementia or my classic 3 AM videos. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments below. I hope to see you all again soon.